Hey everybody, this is Carlos Ocelot, founder and CEO of G2 Esports, former professional gamer, and wonderful bodybuilder, as you may have known. Of course, you know me for that, pretty sure. And you're watching Dancan's channel. Thorin, my man. Enjoy.
Did G2 actually go hard to keep you like they have some of the other big names? Like, was Carlos like doing it super hard, or did you think they undervalued you? Did they kind of just let you go?
No, I find it okay. So what happened is, like a few days before my contract ran out, I told Carlos, like, "Hey, Carlos, listen, I had a great time in G2, but I'm not really interested in extending with G2 right now." And Carlos was really nice and like, "Oh, that sucks. I really wanted to keep you around, and I wanted to make you the CGO at some point, and blah blah." The thing is, he also said that to another player who I knew he didn't want to keep around. So it's like it's up in the air.
But I think we can guess who that is. We'll just leave that for the fans.
Sure, leave it for the fans. So there is definitely a world in which Carlos was also like, it's okay, it's time to move on and get someone else. So it's basically I think it was a very mutual thing at the time.
Because then when you went to FNATIC, you didn't just go as the coach. I tell you what, if you wanted to go there, mate, and you wanted to treat you like coach, they gave you the big boy title. They gave you like the equivalent of the corner office with the plaque, you know, that looks good. Because if people forget, Dylan Falco, now the coach of Schalke, was listed as the head coach of FNATIC, and he still was the coach now, right? But then when you joined, they gave you this title, which almost no one else has ever had. It's called Team Director. Yeah. Now, the problem there, Youngbuck, is fans... They already have a hard enough time telling if coaches are good. They have no idea what a coach actually does literally for the team. So what was the structure here? Because the problem is that could sound like, do you just like get the players in the off season and then he coaches the players? What was kind of the divisional labour? How do you say, like, can you give us some thoughts on how the coaching staff set up? Like, were you basically the head coach?
I think in the end so it felt a little bit like it was like I was being signed as a head coach under disguise, because he didn't want to demote Dylan, and he probably had a good working relationship with Dylan, and I do think he's a very fine coach. And I also I do have to say that he did want someone to be more in charge of League of Legends. So Patrik Steltenpool was in charge at the time with CGO.
Khan, very legendary 1.6 player. Yeah.
A fantastic guy. He wanted to take his hands off of League of Legends and find someone who could run League of Legends for him. So I do think he was actually quite honest in what he wanted. He wanted someone that could take care of the roster at the end of the season and handle all those things, because League of Legends is more drama than most other game titles. So he was trying to take his hand off of it and not having to spend too much time on it. Of course, that didn't happen. I felt like a bit of a head coach. I was doing most of the macro work at the time. Dylan, I think, was very good at the man-to-man coaching and was working with the players on the drafts individually. I was more on the overall, looking at the drafts, and then he would talk to the players if they could do it, what they wanted to play, how they felt about it. But the intention was that I would run the department. But at the end of the first year, I also said, guys, I don't want to do this. I want to be a head coach, because in the end, what happened, like the drafts on stage, I want to be my responsibility. I don't want it to get fucked up. If it gets fucked up, it has to be my fault. And I had to participate in a lot of useless meetings that were just not productive whatsoever, like 1 hour long content meetings where I just need 5 minutes. Just tell me who you need when you need them,
right? And
not start brainstorming things. But I had to spend hours a week sitting in meetings that I felt were not productive at all for me, and I could be spending, well, with the team or studying the game. So I just said, I don't want to do this. I want to be the head coach.
Right. People will forget now because of the success the G2 Super Team had. But before the G2 Super Team, this year was the best year any Western League of Legends team ever had, effectively. Like, playoff team at MSI, win both the splits, go to Worlds and go to the finals. Like, you basically, it's, bear in mind back then, the idea you could actually win the international tournament still wasn't really in people's minds. It's about the best you could ever hope for, right? So if you wanted to prove yourself in terms of coaching chops, surely you did it, because the team was the exact same team minus one player. They'd moved Nemesis and they brought in Hylissang. So it's not like, you know, they switched half the team up or you got all these extra star players. Like, you had basically the same players. So what do you think you brought to FNATIC?
So between leaving G2 and joining FNATIC, again at Worlds I learned again these Korean teams are consistently doing things that we are not aware of, and they have a system to it. They're not doing it randomly. We were still reviewing games a lot of the times, besides the tempo topic, like, oh, we lost this team fight. Why? Oh, we missed a skill shot. It was game by game, looking at the problems and not really seeing the overarching things and like how you should look at the game. And I spent that off-season a lot of time watching the World VODs, and I stole so many things from the Koreans, and I realized, holy shit, these guys are so good. They think about so many things that we never realized, whether they reset together on the map, how they put their wards for objectives, how they rotate from lane to lane, how they kill towers. It was so structured, the approach, and that's what I brought then to FNATIC, because I stole it from the Koreans. I had the authority from the FNATIC players because they thought I took everything from G2 that had just beaten them 4 splits in a row. So they were like, yeah, let's listen to Joey. And it was working. So that's kind of what I brought to FNATIC. I brought macro to FNATIC, and I think in large part to Europe as a whole, because it did get a lot of it is being copied as of now.
Right, if people forget, because I also know another narrative that tends to get lost, I know I myself have fallen into this, is because at the end of the year, like at that Worlds, everyone remembers like already the hype for Caps was enormous. Like everyone's like, this really could be like the Western Faker, and you know, maybe he can beat these guys, and obviously did win the matches. I know I make the mistake myself sometimes of thinking he was that all of Season 8, whereas I remember actually, like in spring, like actually Rekkles was a fucking banger. I think that was one of his better splits. Yeah. Like he was very, very good. Sometimes you obviously played through him. Like, these are the two big names in the team, Caps and Rekkles. Obviously, they're going to go down as like, you know, Hall of Fame, fucking top 10 players ever from West, etc. Like, what was the dynamic like with these two players? Because they seem like totally polar off it. Playing styles, personalities, they seem so off the wall. So, how do you try and use these two players?
I think they had a tremendous amount of respect for each other. I think Caps was kind of seen as the best player on the team, but he actually looked up to Rekkles more than most other players. But I don't think there was really necessarily a system of how we were playing off of these players. I think that came much later when I realized that Caps was, for example, doing extremely well on roaming champions and was really good at impacting the map. But that was it came way later. So I can't say too much to it. There were times then I don't think they ever had like big issues together, for what that's worth. We had quite some issues with the team overall or between players at times, but I don't think they specifically had issues with one another, fighting each other, arguing, or hating each other's guts. They just respected each other. They were both the ones spamming solo queue more than anyone else. That's probably where a large part of the respect came from. And they both recognize each other's talent. So I don't think they talked a lot to one another, but they did respect each other tremendously.
Right, you said earlier in the interview, for you, Caps is the Western GOAT.
Yeah.
If you're saying that right,
yeah.
Was he already at that kind of level in this team? Is it some of it later? Well, give me some thoughts on him. Why is he your Western GOAT? And like, what's special about him as a player?
I've seen him win more games that were not winnable than any other player. He opens up games with plays that seem impossible. He makes the impossible happen consistently. He gets away from team fights with 1 or 10 HP, and you think it's lucky, but he does it over and over and over, and it's not luck. This guy is in a completely different dimension. Solo kills opponents consistently, plays every champion. I think he is the best player Europe has ever had, for sure. For sure, that's my opinion, just based off of that.
Right, when you were coaching a player like Rekkles, I've said a lot of this publicly, I've had to allude to a lot of it though, because one thing people don't know is like, unless a story, like I said earlier, unless something about it's out there, like it's not my business to go telling everyone's like private shit, especially, by the way, one thing I don't do is, I don't reveal personal things that are outside of the game, like, you know, unless it's relevant to like what happened in the team or a dynamic or something, like, again, if someone does something, whatever, that's outside of the remit. Like, I only know them as a pro player in League of Legends, that's how I judge them. But I have heard, since if I reference Forgiven, I was very honest about him, he's a friend of mine, you know, if I talk about a player like Rekkles, I've heard from teammates, even coaches, he's tricky to work with. Like, he's not a person, it's not how a lot of his fans might see him on the face value, which is, I've always said, he's basically the most perfect face European League of Legends could ever have. He's the clean-cut Swedish guy with the blonde hair, blue eyes. He seems like he has a lovely attitude. He's quiet, so people are kind of like, they vibe with him. He practices, his consistency's been incredible, like, team player. There's so many things to go that are positive, but I don't want to paint a one-sided picture, and I don't want people to pretend he was a saint, you know. So give me some thoughts. Was it tricky with the tactics you had to use to work with Rekkles and to get him on side with certain things or certain ideas? I mean, people might know even before your time, there's times where maybe he didn't want players who were teammates, or maybe he wanted to bench himself. This happened during this year, obviously. So can I have some thoughts on some of the challenges of working with Rekkles, and how do you do it in the end?
At times it was difficult. I don't think when it comes to in-game related stuff it was difficult. I I think Rekkles was the kind of guy where if he had his ups and downs, and when he was up, he could lift the entire team with him, and he would be just about the perfect teammate you could ask for. But when he had his downs, it could get very ugly as well. So one of the things that happened is I signed on for FNATIC, and the first thing I hear is, hey, we have a situation. Hylissang and Rekkles are bootcamping in Korea, and something happened. We don't know what, but they're not on speaking terms anymore. But rest assured, if it doesn't work out, we have Jesse still signed. So if you need to make a change, we can do that. I ended up fixing it at the start of the split, but it was not easy. I still don't know like who was at fault, what happened. But it did kind of set the tone, and there were times where it was difficult. I think Rekkles needs trust in his teammates or trust in himself that he's going to win the series, and then he's going to be fantastic. Now, if he's going to a series or a Worlds and he just doesn't believe in it, then it can be difficult because he will try to isolate himself more from the team. So it has its ups and downs. Like for me, positively, we had to play C9 in the semifinals, and I was worried out of my mind because everyone was like, haha, C9 in the semifinals, haha, we're going to the finals. And I was like, that's not happening. But then Rekkles just looked me in the eye and said, Joey, we're not going to lose 3 games to these guys. I will not let it happen. And then I knew, okay, if Rekkles says that, and he says that in front of the team and to his coach, you just know you're going to win that series. But when we had to scrim, for example, against RNG, against Uzi, it was completely different. It was very difficult to keep him very actively involved in the game, and he felt like he was more isolating himself.
Right, I've got an analogy. You might like it because I know you're a big fan of the old days and the great players and sportsmen. So obviously you were around during the era of Moscow 5, right? This legendary European team. And I've got an analogy that I've never heard anyone make, but I'll make it for this bot lane because there was a detail that not a lot of people really understood, which is the reason why Edward left that team when they were still an amazing team when they were Gambit, is because even though that bot lane was fire, like it was an amazing, like it had everything. It had like the passive player, it had the aggressive player, it had the tension, it had the dynamic, the way they played with the map, like everything was great. Internally, like they didn't see it that way. Like Edward he was the Hylissang. He was the guy who was like, he wants to be super aggressive. If there's a kill, we're flashing for the kill. I've got both of us and we're going to hit this guy and we're going to kill him. Even if, we might die and even if we can't calculate the health bars and all that garbage. Like, problem is, Genji's philosophy, he was the Rekkles. He was like, I'm here to farm minions, get my items, and then I'm going to carry this team fight. Like, I've got a team fight comp. I'm not fucking going for this, 40-60 or 50-50. Like, we're not doing that. In fact, famously, Genji would just let Edward go in and then just sort of be like, well, if you don't want to die, don't do that again. Right? I'm guessing there's a little bit of this because if I'm like a Hylissang, I want trust. I want you to just go in with me when you go in. But if I'm Rekkles, it's like, why are we taking, funnily enough, reckless aggression? Why are we taking chances we don't need to? There had to be the creative tension. Some of it had to be there in this bot lane, right?
Yeah, most certainly, because I think in Hilly you have probably the best creative player in Europe, and Rekkles is the best, controlled, playing the lane properly, using the waves properly, and just getting your good base timings, getting to late game carrying. So they were complete polar opposites, which definitely caused tension from time to time over the 2 years. They did get, as time grew on, I think they did start to really respect each other because, of course, Hilly started to see okay, if nothing happens before 25 minutes, my AD carry is going to do better than enemy AD carry. And Rekkles started seeing that Hilly was doing very well in the laning phase. Like when he was engaging, it's because he saw something that maybe he himself didn't see, because Hilly just does that. He sees things that his teammates and his coaches don't see, but do work out. So I think they grew in respect over the time. Of course, if there was a week where Hilly would engage or do something creative 5 times and it didn't work, it could be a rough day in the office. But I think over time they grew more and more respect for each other and got better as a bot lane because they just understood, we're polar opposites. Let's kind of try to make it work, or at least we have faith in what the other person is doing.
When you went to that Worlds, people are going to remember, although they might not remember this detail, but they will when I remind them. FNATIC won the group stage, and the group had Invictus Gaming in it. Now, bearing in mind, in the final when they played you, now everyone will claim it was obvious they were going to win, blah, blah, blah. I remember I felt like a 50-50. I was interested to see which way this is going to go. And because you'd obviously won the 2 out of the 3 games against them because it was a tiebreaker, there was even grounds to fuck, the West could win Worlds. So people might not realise that was also another chance. In fact, on paper, maybe it was even better than chance of G2 beating FPX. Who knows? Right? Do you think, look back, was that a missed opportunity? Should you have won Worlds?
We could have. I think so. I think some of the players really burned out after the semifinals, and I think we, as an organization and coaching staff, made a decision. So basically, we started really celebrating after the semifinals. We started to bring in all the family. We were having dinners, and I think that kind of took away from the prize that was still there. Now, there's of course a world where we wouldn't have brought in the family of all the players, and we would have still gotten 3-0, and it would have been a waste of an opportunity
Sure.
for them to see the kids in the final. But I don't think the wins in the group stage were a fluke at all against Invictus Gaming. It's just that during this tournament, the meta developed immensely, and that happens a lot at Worlds. But I think this Worlds was taking it to an extreme, because the way League of Legends was being played was just the better bot lane wins, and you just play to your bot lane, and then your bot lane carries. And then suddenly, the whole meta starts to shift, where you need to have the best solo lanes, and your bot lane is a little bit more supportive. Your jungler becomes very important and impactful, and now we're playing, or like we're having to go with the flow and play a style that we're not as practiced on. And I think that changed a lot, because, for example, KT also lost 3-2 to Invictus Gaming, and that was the series that actually changed the meta for Worlds. If it was still a bot, like if playing to bot was still the right way to play the game, or like the most efficient way, I think KT would have won that series, and they would have met us in the final, and that would have been or RNG, because RNG also ended up losing because the meta changed, and then the solo lanes of G2 were just better than RNG. So even the bot lane difference wasn't enough to win the game. That had such a massive impact on the series that we could have won Worlds if it was still a bot lane meta, but we would have also had to probably play RNG or KT if that was the case. And against KT, based on scrims, would have been a 5-game banger, and RNG would probably not. We would have not have won.
Oh, they would actually have won the tournament? They would straight up have won?
Well, we would have had to hope that KT would take out RNG for us, basically.
Sure. Yes, because if people don't remember, obviously you scrim all the teams on the other side of the bracket.
Yeah.
It goes without saying. Yes, you actually did know the strength of these teams.
Yeah.
All right, here's a question for you then. At this tournament, like, I don't think Bwipo has ever looked better than he did in this particular tournament. This was when, put it this way, I've obviously been not only his friend, but like a lifelong sOAZ fan, basically. I think he's a fucking genius player. But I even have to say, when I watched some of those games, like, I can't hate on you. Like, fucking Bwipo was doing awesome, and he had the champions, and he even had that bizarre shit where he'd been like one trick Invictor years earlier, and then now we can use it in the tournament. Like, everything was so flawed. What was this like peak Bwipo tournament? Like, what type of player was he? How were we trying to use him?
It was, I think, a lot of months of him performing very well in scrim. So basically the entire narrative from the moment that sOAZ injured himself and came back is Bwipo was winning more in scrims, and I could kind of sense that the players preferred playing with Bwipo. But sOAZ was consistently playing better on stage, and he was getting the wins in, and that reflected itself in the finals, where we started Bwipo because we thought that was the right thing to do, because he was performing better in scrims.
Yes.
Lost this game, took out sOAZ, brought in sOAZ, won the next 3 games, and sOAZ played well. And that was kind of the narrative, where Bwipo was doing better in scrims, sOAZ was doing better on stage, and then we go into Worlds, and again, the scrim win rates with Bwipo were probably 20% higher than with sOAZ. But so basically all of the bootcamp, which I think was like 3 weeks long, we're kind of planning to start Bwipo, but then right before World starts a few days, sOAZ goes on this absolute tear, goes 12-0 in scrims with Sion, and guess what? We want to play the first game against Invictus Gaming. We want to draft Sion top lane. So we start sOAZ, and he plays completely out of his mind. Probably one of the best games of his career, but we lose. And then we give Bwipo the try in the second half. It was a complete Hail Mary. It was more of a way of like, okay, Bwipo, you're doing good in scrims with carry champions. We're probably not good enough to beat IG. We have to do something a little bit crazy. I need to throw in an unknown factor or a surprise factor. I throw in Bwipo, and we beat IG twice. And that's where Bwipo solidified his starting position for the playoffs. And then on top of that, of course, there was like this random meta shift where suddenly out of nowhere Victor comes in the meta, and Bwipo had a few thousand games on Victor throughout his career because he just liked playing Victor in mid lane. So that just, it all came together.
in terms of, obviously, like, this was after this tournament, like, sOAZ left the team, and he even says, like, part of it, he even says, by the way, because I know at the time everyone was like, it's just because of money, he wants to be paid, or, you know, he wants to start in spot. He claims in his Reflections interview that he even potentially might even have stayed as, like, you know, like, you share the spot. He just felt like he was, like, disrespected in a way. He felt like, you know, like, people didn't, like, you know, look, I'm a veteran, I've done all this, like, I'm always good, etc. Like, what would you say in that regard? Like, did you want to keep him in the team? Should you have run, like, a 6-man roster in your dream world? Would that be what you would have done? Would you ever have considered just staying with sOAZ if the money's there? So what would you say to that angle?
No, I think it was pretty clear that we were going to start Bwipo because he was already, like I said, he was performing better in scrims quite consistently, had a good Worlds run, and for us it just made sense to keep on Bwipo. And yeah, maybe to get into the sOAZ topic a bit, like sOAZ probably hates my guts, and he has alluded to it a few times that he didn't like the FNATIC management, and I have to say that's me, mainly. Because, you know, in the end, I had to make a decision between two players to start on stage, and we could have beaten EDG perhaps in the quarterfinals or C9 in the semifinals with sOAZ playing, but I kind of took that Worlds run away from him, or like he was more of a passenger, and I understand that it hurts. I also think that he's mature enough to also see that I just have to make the choice that I believe is the best for the team, if he looks back on that. And I do like him a lot as a person, so it really sucks, but I think our relationship soured quite a bit from that. Basically from the moment the injury happened, a few things happened that I didn't really like. So one lesson I learned from my father: if you have an very important conversation with someone, never do it alone. Have someone to back you up when things go wrong. So I had a conversation at the start, before when we started practicing. I think it was for MSI actually. We were practicing for MSI. sOAZ was recovering. I said, okay, this is what we're gonna do. Bwipo is gonna do 4 or 5 scrims a day. You're gonna get the other one and we're gonna slowly bring you back into the mix. And keeping in mind, I wanted sOAZ to start at MSI because Bwipo played playoffs with us in the spring, but it wasn't very good. Like, his laning was very off. He was doing okay in team fights, but laning wise, you could see he was still a rookie. He was not ready for MSI at all. So I did want sOAZ to play, but he couldn't even use all his fingers at the time. He had to rebind his mouse and his keyboard. He had to change his keys because his hand was still broken. So I said, you're going to play one game. Bwipo is going to play the rest. And of course, after in the first day of practice, and I did this where Bwipo and Dylan were in the call as well. sOAZ starts this first game, I believe, and then I put in Bwipo, and so I was like, what the fuck is this? Aren't we supposed to do 50-50?
Okay.
But sOAZ apparently didn't get that message. Maybe because it was a 15-minute call, maybe he just kind of zoned out after a while, or when I talked about, listen, hey, Bwipo's going to play more scrims. It's entirely possible, but sOAZ thinks that he was not communicated to properly, and that the same thing happened at World, so that's why he holds a grudge against me. Now, of course, there's always two sides to the story. But basically, to get back to the question, Bwipo had better scrim results. I could feel that the players preferred scrimming with Bwipo and playing with Bwipo, so that was kind of a done deal, and there wasn't really any plans for a 6-man roster at the time.
One of the reasons I definitely didn't think, I understood why Bwipo played, and again, I kind of agree with your characterization. In the spring playoffs, if anything, the way that you gave credit to Bwipo was like, wow, you actually filled in a team that's not like the team you were a starter in, and they still won. Wow, you must have just not lost the game. It's not that you were sick, you just didn't lose the game. Yeah, that's your job. And the problem is, of all the players in history, if there's anyone thinks like, oh, I've got my starting spot, it's going to be someone like sOAZ, because he was so good for so many years. Yeah. And I remember the year before you got there, where like he's basically the reason they even got out of that group stage mess where they were like down and they should have fucking gone out of the group stage. Like, he just put them on his back. And I noticed also as a top laner, he's one of the only top laners I've seen who actually like seem to have a better sense of like macro concepts than some of the fucking other players in the game, like the supports sometimes, because a lot of top laners, if people don't know, they just rely on like following orders, like, oh, shall I teleport now? Yes, press the button. Like, this guy actually understood like how to play the map out and stuff. So give me some thoughts on him as a player. Like, what were his strengths? What were his weaknesses?
I think he was a fantastic player, and that he was just really unlucky with the circumstances. And again, he was brilliant. He had good macro understanding. He knew his role. He knew how to play weak side, which particularly in that roster was very important on the way I wanted to play the game and how the team also saw the game. And he was fine with it, you know. He was just going to tank the ganks and we're going to win and kill the Nexus. He was really fine with it, so that was perfect. His champion pool was fitting. He had the experience. He could also first-time champions. He's one of the all-time greats, and he was a fantastic player back then as well. And then we come just back, like Kiki's kind of benched himself. sOAZ gets injured, which was kind of his own fault. Well, mainly, yeah, it was his own fault. I can say that now. And then Bwipo comes in the picture. Had that not happened, again, Bwipo would not have been scrimming as much with us. He wouldn't have played MSI. He wouldn't have played in the playoffs. He wouldn't have played probably in the summer. And we would have never heard of Bwipo, or he would have just gone on to another team most likely. But the injury happened, and suddenly a lot of things kick in motion, and people start performing better and better and better. And now there's a reason to actually share scrim time in the summer, and Bwipo runs away with it.
Even though I will say I've heard from, let's just say, people in and around the team previously, like a lot of these worlds that FNATIC went to, even ones where you weren't there, had like drama behind the scenes. I mean, people actually don't know how much drama there can be when you're in like a Korean for a fucking 3 weeks and then a month at a tournament. Like a lot of teams have like, even if they have success in the game, they have blow-ups. People or people like already. The maddest is this isn't unique. People are already thinking of leaving, or another team's like low key poaching them. Right when you came back from Worlds on paper, just like the whole thing of like, well, how could sOAZ ever be replaced? The one thing every fan's going to think is, well, you're definitely going to run back this 5-man lineup. Look what they just did. So the idea, like one day you wake up and you basically just hear like, oh yeah, by the way, Caps is going to G2. All right, can we get Perks? No, they're doing Caps and Perks, and then they're just making a super team, and then we've just got a hole in the mid lane and we have to find someone. Give me some thoughts on this. Like, is that really happened? You just wake up one day and it's like, this is gone? Because didn't he leave like the instant the window opened or something?
So we did try everything we could to keep Caps. We already tried to extend his contract midway through the split. I reached out to FNATIC and said, listen, we have to do it now. We have to try to extend before the contracts run out. That's one of the great lessons that Carlos taught me back in G2. You don't let their contracts run out. We wanted to continue with them. So I reached out to Caps. I want you to extend. And I want to build the roster around you for the coming years. I knew this guy was brilliant. It was... Even the untrained eye could see it, but he wasn't interested. And then the off season happens, and yeah, I'm like, we made the World's Finals. There's a good chance he's going to stay. We didn't. Apparently, there were already some rumors floating around about him joining G2 and with Perks going AD carry, but we didn't know ourselves at the time. So G2 comes and asks for permission to speak to FNATIC. I was not in charge, but Patrik was like, oh, we can wait a bit with a reply of 24, 48 hours. And then we had a strategy. Okay, let's ask then to talk to Perks in return because, worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Let's just sign
Makes
Perks.
sense.
Now, we know what happened in the history. So I reached out to Perks like, hey, mate, we got permission from G2 to speak to you. Hey, there's a chance that... G2 might be signing Caps for mid lane. Would you be really interested in playing for us? And a day later, I get a message from Perks like, nah, I'm good. Don't, thank you. And we didn't know what was going on at all.
Okay.
Like we didn't know that Rekkles was going, that Perks was going to play AD carry, right? So we're like, what the hell? And then a few days later, we see the interview, and we were still really tugging and trying to fight with G2. And from what I heard later on from his father, it was extremely close, and at the time I think his family wanted him to stay in FNATIC, but whatever happened, like he had some issues that he told me up front, and quite frankly I couldn't fix them. He said he had some problems, said that he felt were going to happen again in 2019, and I had to just tell him the reality is I cannot fix them for you right now, maybe in the future but not in the spring of 2019. Regardless of that, it was still close. But he ended up going to G2, and of course we didn't get Perks, as we all know, so we were completely left empty-handed there. And yeah, the rest is a bit of history.
Because that's also the part I always feel like people don't really like understand the genius of like Ocelot letting them do that move. It's not even that he could know that the Perks move would work out. You take both of the best mid laners. It means your rival has nothing. Because in this scenario, if people remember, obviously, you went with Nemesis, you went with one of the rookies coming out the RLs that had the success, but there weren't that many other players even available. Like, I mean, back then, this is when, like Febiven's already in the Misfits team. Like, there's not really... was there even any other big names available at the time? Was there other people you were considering?
Yeah, so Niski was the first guy that we really, really wanted, and we basically had come to an agreement with Splice at the time, because they weren't going to... get the LEC spot. This was the year of the franchising, and their application got turned down. So their players were free to speak to other teams. They could join other teams. And what ended up happening is that at the end, two organizations pulled out. I think it was North and the Spanish team. Maybe Movie Star Riders pulled out because they didn't like the deal, or I think Movie Star Riders had to change their name. So they pull out. Guess what happens? Splice gets the 9th spot, XL gets the 10th spot, and now Splice says, sorry, but we're not selling any of our players to a rival team in Europe. So Niski got shipped off to America. And again, we had to then look for players in the ERLs, and then it was Nemesis, Leader, and Magifelix that were on our list. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to have a 6-man roster with Leader and Nemesis with Magifelix behind them. Of course,
that's an interesting premise.
It's wishful thinking as well, of course, because not everyone is happy to share a position.
I'm pretty sure that most of them, like at least the first 2 of the 3, definitely would want to be a starter, right?
Yeah, I mean, I asked Nemesis and Leader how they felt about it, and they're like, no, I don't want to share a spot. They were just straight about it, and quite frankly, I can respect that as well. So we had to make a decision between the 2, and we chose Nemesis.
Right. What was the thinking behind why you picked him up? Like, did you have a sense of, like, from watching him in the Mad Lions team, I'm talking about the ERL team here, obviously, did you have a sense of, like, because obviously, let's be real, like, no one's just going to come in and be Caps. Like, they're not going to do what Caps did. They're not going to be that style of player. So presumably you were trying to identify something specifically about this is what Nemesis is going to do for this team. Like, what did you envision him as a mid laner doing?
At the time, I was mostly being led by the players, and for the players, it was a really quick decision because we at some point had to involve the likes of Bwipo, Hylissang, and Broxah, and we just said, like, listen, hey, these are the guys on our list. And the first thing, I think one of the 2 of them said, Leader. And no, that guy is too toxic in solo queue. That's not happening. So if it's between those 2, let's go with Nemesis. Now, we did push a little bit, and we ended up sending Broxah to duo queue with Nemesis, I believe, and he came back very positively. We watched his games from the ERL. And he just did what I kind of wanted: play control mages, play them well, play good in team fights, be consistent, reliable. So nothing that Caps was, because Caps was as unreliable as possible, but also in the best way in most of the games. But I felt, you know what, if I can get a reliable mid laner, I have a star-studded team around him, it's going to work. And it didn't at the start, it kind of did at the end, but it was a rough year.
Now, obviously, this is also where not only does the split start badly, but this is what's interesting about doing talk shows where I get to, like, it's one of the cool things I enjoy as a historian. I'll give everyone a little secret piece of info they don't understand here. As a historian, by doing talk shows regularly, I'm sort of getting how I get to see how the context changes from the experts over the years. I don't just get the context at the end of the year, like, this team was the best. I get to see, like, oh no, they thought this team was the best first, and then, you know, another one rolls up. So one of the interesting things is you can go back on my shows to season 7, and in season 7, summer, when Misfits famously upset FNATIC in that EU LCS semi-final, when FNATIC was supposed to be like the best team in the league, Rekkles is like the MVP, my analysts back then basically were sort of predicting that. I don't think they predicted the exact result, but they were saying, like, look, I see actual flaws in this FNATIC team. I actually think that, like, you know, maybe Broxah could be exploited. Like, he's basically got, like, winning lanes, and he doesn't seem to always punish the opposing jungler when he has that. And, you know, he can play a bit safe. And so they were saying all these things, like, if people path correctly, if they punish him right, he can do, right? The problem is that doesn't matter if you're then in the season 8 team and you win everything and the team's awesome and you have winning lanes and all that scenario, right? But in season 9, I noticed this is when that narrative just took over everything, because since the team was doing badly and it has all these top players in, a lot of focus went into the Broxah issue. And I've noticed, like, whether or not he likes it, I'm sure no one likes to be criticised in that way. I would say he's maybe had some of the similar things in teams that aren't FNATIC now. He's gone to these other American squads. Similar criticisms kind of followed him. Like, give us some thoughts on working with Broxah. Like, where were the flaws? Where were the weaknesses? Where were the strengths? Because obviously people remember famously season 8 Worlds. He had some amazing games.
Broxah is probably the most professional player I've ever worked with, and extremely kind-hearted, good person. Pretty good with coaching, picking up on new things. Also flexible with champion pool, which you mentioned, I think is important. At least when he's not under pressure, because when his spot was up for question, he became basically a 2 or 3 trick. But before that, he was really flexible, really easygoing, never caused any issues whatsoever. So from that perspective, he was fantastic. I do think he was farming too much, and we couldn't always see eye to eye on how to play around in the jungle. But I would say overall it was a very positive experience, and I think he became the victim of 2019. And there is, in the sense that he maybe wasn't performing the best, and it was fair, and maybe some of the weaknesses were showing. But internally, I think how we handled it was overdone. You know, that's one of my biggest regrets in my career, how Broxah was treated in 2019. It was not how a player should be treated by his teammates or by his coaches.
As in, he was kind of treated like the problem, I'm guessing.
Yeah, he was
like, look, you can only do this and you can't do X and Y.
Yeah, he was treated as the main scapegoat, and well, especially the start of the split. I don't think we were losing because of Broxah. Again, this is we came back from the biggest success we've ever had. There was complacency all around. We were trying really creative drafts, being cocky, like, oh, we're going to win anyway. It's whatever it is. And there were a lot of early games where we got actually quite unlucky. We lost on level once, and some things didn't go our way. That could have been a little based on luck. Because we could have won at least 2 of those games, the first 5 games. But throughout the split, he became more and more of a scapegoat. The seeds got planted within the players, like, oh, it's Broxah, it's Broxah, it's Broxah. I think we as coach kind of bought into it at some point as well, because the players would come to us and say, oh, I can't play the game because of this or that. And I think it was a little bit unfair, and Broxah didn't have anyone in his corner. And at some point, it became multiple players against Broxah, multiple people in the staff against Broxah, and we had to diffuse it a bit by getting a 6-man roster basically for the summer.
Now, as you've alluded to a number of times now, this is the split that starts where you was down 1-6, then you're down 3-7. And I remember saying to people on talk shows, like, because everyone was doing the thing that they've then done for all the splits since, which is like, it's FNATIC, you know, they'll pick it up. It's always going to be FNATIC G2, blah, blah, blah. They'll all meet in the final. And I was like, you do know, though, that because they've already, like, lost that many games, they have to basically go mental now, mate. Like, they have to basically not just be good. They have to basically be, if not the best team, like the second best team in the whole league. And consistently just, they can't make mistakes now. You have to be perfect. So to me, I would go ahead and guess in history, if you ever look up any team that starts like that, there's no way they made the playoffs. Like, they would definitely not, because like even if you get pretty good, say you had like a 55% win rate, it wouldn't be good enough. You probably wouldn't get enough points to be in where you want to be. So to me, this is the great escape. So give me some thoughts. How did you do it? Part of it, I think you sort of alluded to there, right? I mean, one thing is, if you're having level 1 problems and cohesion problems, if there was ever a Band-Aid split, this must have been it, right? Because I remember this was another split where, this is another area I'll always give credit to Rekkles. I've noticed when things go to shit in FNATIC, it's like there's a, you know that in a cartoon, you smash the red box on the wall in a case of an emergency and you take out like an axe or a fire extinguisher or something. That's what Rekkles is. You just right, go through the bot lane. We play through Rekkles now. Give me some thoughts. How did you set this up? What was the style you brought in? Because this Band-Aid, it would work like a motherfucker, mate.
Well, again, like it was a mixture of complacency. We didn't prepare well enough before our scrims even. But then when we started scrimming, we were playing our world's champions from season 8, by the way. We were still playing Swain top lane and whatever was meta at the time, in all roles. We were still winning. I actually counted. We had about 85% win rate in scrims going into the season. So we felt like we were gods on top of the world. We had a really cocky interview. We had like a team-wide interview, and we were like kind of shitting on Caps for leaving us because we were like, we're winning every scrim. Like, this guy is gonna regret it forever. This guy's gonna regret his decision. But then the stage things happened, and a little bit of luck, but also lack of cohesionness, overconfident complacency, and then the Band-Aids came in. First of all, mid jungle wasn't working, and we were being too creative. So do what works. You pick a tank in the top lane. You pick you draft for your bot lane basically. And what the Band-Aid was for mid lane, it was mainly drafting Lissandra, making sure we had Lissandra in our team, because Lissandra was so broken back then. Could push the wave on her own, go into the river, drafted with a level 6 jungler like Nocturne, Cartus, and just have the gank pressure on the map while just farming. That was kind of the idea behind it. And if that didn't work, we would try to draft something like Syndra, which would do the same. And then at some points we were like, okay, we can pick Corki or Orianna for scaling, but then we're just going to pick Gragas and we're going to tell Broxah to pair to down bot lane level 3. So that was kind of what the main Band-Aid situation was. And on top of that, it was a lot of man-to-man coaching and just man-to-team coaching, because I had to pull the alarm bell. We were not going to do well, and a lot of it had to do with complacency and how much effort we were putting into scrims and in solo queue.
Would you agree? Because I've said this on some podcasts, you weren't there. Like, you know, I've always told you, like, one of my dreams is I like documentaries, I like really good documentaries where you have all the talking heads. And the key thing to do those is you have to actually include everyone. Like, it's actually kind of bullshit if you have like 2 guys from a team and then, you know, the other 3, maybe like they get blamed or whatever. So if you were ever going to do this, you'd have to have most of these players. I've always said if there's ever a year or a split that someone needs to make that documentary, is this one. Because if people know how bad it was and then how it turned around, like, this is miracle stuff. So can you give us some concepts? Again, you don't have to give the trade secrets away here, but like, what are some things you do as a coach to turn a squad like that around? Because it isn't just, you know, pick this champion, of course.
No, I think the first thing that had to be done was have a team call, a team talk. No corona, so well, we were in person, of course, and just basically put the finger. In Dutch, you say you put the finger where it hurts. You know, like just
Right.
hey, this is the problem that we're having, and we need to fix it right fucking now. Otherwise, we're gonna go down this hill, and we're too good to make that happen. And just address like, hey, the effort we're putting into scrims, it's basically it's pathetic. It's not okay. Like we came into the split thinking that we were just gonna run over the EU LCS, or maybe there's no motivation to practice against those weak teams when you've just been playing at Worlds and you've been scrimming KT, RNG, IG, EDG, name all the big ones. Africa Freaks were there. I know, like it's not easy to then come back and scrim against the Vitality, Misfits, or Rocket. Maybe I shouldn't be name shaming, but it is difficult. And but that was a moment where we had to really pull the alarm bell and wake everyone up. So what we started doing is we started to enforce office hours, because also in our culture at that time, basically before scrims, the players would come in like 5 minutes, 10 minutes before the meeting. Scrims were over. 4 of the players left back to their own apartments and just stayed there. And Nemesis was usually left playing solo queue on his own. Sometimes Hylissang would join, but the rest of the guys would go home. They would either play from home, stream from home, or whatever. But it basically created a really bad culture where there was very little time spent. So we enforced a office schedule where we had mandatory solo queue hours. Then we included duo queue schedules where in the solo queue hours we had specific duo queue partners to play with each other, and basically really just upping the volume of games that we were playing together. Yeah, and then combining that with the drafts or just the overall strategy just completely turned around that split until sOAZ became meta, because that eventually ended up being our downfall.
Now, when we come to the summer, funny thing is, this shows why it's why I asked earlier about like the concept that like on the one hand you do a band-aid, but it can't just be a band-aid. Like think of the real analogy there. Band-aid is like you put like a band-aid over the wound, but the wound needs to heal. You still need to heal it. By the summer, even though there might have been some personal issues I heard about, the team in the summer was fire. If people forget, that was the one where you guys started off brilliantly and you had all these incredible, like you were super good in the early game. In fact, you even like dusted off fucking G2 once or twice in that split. So like the summer team, what was it? What was this team like when it reached its peak, when it was at its strength?
I think we just kind of started to understand what we could get from each other, what our strengths and weaknesses were. We had a very, very bad ending to the spring split, so I think there was a lot more motivation to do better because we lost 3-1 to Origin, and I think a lot of the players got to vent their frustration, and then we brought in the 6-man roster, which I think helped quite a lot. And we just started winning, but the cracks were still there at the time. They just kind of got covered up by us winning. And I was telling the management, like, we should be playing Dan a few times because the cracks are still there. And the management was, don't change the winning team. Don't change the winning team. The public won't like it. Don't do it. So that kind of became the storyline of the early spring split. So when we went 7-0 before we went to Rift Rifles, where Dan did play 2 games, that one of them was definitely not good. The other one was okay. But a lot happened at that tournament, which again caused us to have struggles for the rest of the split, I would say. For the regular split at least, but got back on the horse. And at some point we also just committed to Broxah. But again, the cracks were always there. We were just winning because we knew what the cracks were and we were trying to cover them up as a team. We kind of understood. Of course, I didn't tell the players, listen, I'm drafting Lissandra and Cartus because you guys are not doing your job together. It just kind of went unsaid, and I think the players like understood why they were kind of picking those champions, and that we just found other solutions, of course, throughout the split, and especially in the summer split when those champions fell out of meta. But again, I think the cracks still showed, and when we took G2 to 5 games in the first series, because we had to play them twice.
Yes, we
didn't think we were going to 2-0 them. We thought we went to that studio getting ready to get our asses blasted, and then we found ourselves 2-0 up. After the third game, a lot of backstage drama happened. So that series went out the window because it was not fixable. And then we went to Greece to Athens, I think it was, and again had a 5-game banger where we had a lot more confidence. But I think before the first series, we actually didn't feel like we were as strong as you may allude to. Like we just felt like we were an okay second team, and we were just going to go to Worlds and hopefully make something like quarters and just make the best out of the season with what we have. But it didn't feel like we enjoyed playing with each other, that we were particularly strong.
I know that actually the G2 players themselves, they've even said it on my shows, they actually think that the rest of us all overrate G2, because the problem is, I get what they mean by this. The first impression was the incredible spring split where they were just wrecking everyone in the playoffs. And then they obviously went to MSI, and again, they were the best team in the world. But they even say, from this summer onwards, including Worlds, like, they think they had all sorts of problems. They would lose scrims. Like, they even, like, famously, they didn't even think they would make that run at Worlds. They thought they was going to get beaten by damn one and go home immediately. So, like, it's one thing if you're in the spring one. That's the one where when I interviewed Mithy, he basically admits, like, that's almost like part of why he retired. Because it's like, there's nothing you can do. You can set the whole map up correctly. You can have all the right draft. You can think you know how you want to play them. You can get a slight lead and they win anyway. The summer one, like you say, was beatable. Like, this is the one that they had their flaws. I remember in the finals, even actually Caps had a whole bunch of bad games. He had a whole bunch of the craps ones where he was fucking in a bunch of games. Like, what do you think the essential core, once you take away players playing well, was there some like magical extra element to G2 that why they just always won these series? Why in stage games they were just money? Was there something extra about them?
Well, I'm a little bit surprised to hear that. So from Mithy, I understand, because that was a feeling we had in G2, and I think that was just kind of the expectation from pundits, like analysts, journalists. The Western teams come, and if they make it out of groups, they've done a great job. And if they don't, it's okay. You have a participation trophy. But I feel like 2018 was really the transformation of Europe, because us making the finals, G2 making the semifinals, that was, for me at least, a turnaround moment where the region became more confident and kind of raised the bar a bit and says making out of groups is not what we're coming here for. We need to do better than that consistently. So I would think that a player like Perks and Cavs, who did make, and Wunder and Jankos made it really far, they should have had a different mindset. I would have expected differently from them. Now, perhaps the scrims went very poorly. That was what it was all about. But
I think they claimed they lost like 17 out of 18 scrims to Down 1 before they played them in the quarterfinals, or something mental like that, you know.
That is quite possible. In that case, I don't really know. What I can say for FNATIC at the time is scrimming was terrible. It felt bad. It was not a fun experience. But when we went on stage, all the problems disappeared. Everyone was working together towards the same end goal. I have no clue what happened within G2 at the time. So in FNATIC, we still thought, we can make it to quarters, maybe to semis. Depends a bit on the draw. We had a very bad group draw, but made it out. But for G2, I don't know what really played there, or if they didn't have the feeling that they could do better on stage than in scrims, which we had that feeling we could go 50-50 a week of scrims and knew we would win on stage. So I can't really speak to it, but I'm a little bit surprised, because I would think that a player like Caps, especially Caps, would not be afraid, because when we were boot camping in Korea in 2018, he was actually the one dumpstering a lot of those players that are on the top teams right now. And of course, like Showmaker was holding his own easily, or like he was very up there with Caps, but I don't think it was good enough to put fear in his boots or anything like that.
Right. When you went to this Worlds, as you say, it was actually one of those ones where on paper, like, it wouldn't even have been like actually a disgrace if you didn't go out of the groups. Like, like the RNG, SKT was the teams in the group.
Yep.
And you had to do that run where the first week's the one where it looks like you're going to be third, and then you eventually pipped RNG and you got in after all. What happened at Worlds? Is there any story to what turned that around?
To the group stage, I don't think there's a big story. I think we had a little bit of, well, actually SKT, we played in the first game, and they kind of, we were playing the Yuumi Garen, I think, which we thought were going to work. And I still think in hindsight, that game wasn't lost, because everyone was saying, oh, it's so brilliant. They picked Kale into Yuumi Garen, and that wasn't the reason at all that they won. But Kale was disgustingly broken, and we knew it, and we were trying to hide it because we didn't think other teams caught on. But they did pick it. It just wasn't particularly like great into Yuumi Garen or anything, which was what it was praised for as picking as an AD carry pick, whereas we were picking it, I think, in mid lane, which later kind of also became meta in our group stage. I just think it was how FNATIC was the entire season. Like the bootcamp was an absolutely terrible experience. Scrimming was horrible. We were all kind of ready to go home, but when it's stage time, we all get together, we get the draft settled, and when we sit in those chairs, or when the players sit in those chairs, suddenly everyone is their best friend, and we're doing everything they can to win, and the results get there, and suddenly we have the. I think I still every year I show players in Excel from this roster, the last roster before that. I always show them the RNG game because it's one of the 2 cleanest League of Legends games I think have ever been played. So we had this extremely clean game against RNG. We beat SKT before that as well with just pretty clean play and a little bit of luck. My main story, I think, would be the quarterfinals, Fun plus Phoenix, because the story there was that we were still playing Yuumi Garen, or we played it in the first week, but we went back to 80 carries in the second week, which was working for us. We started winning with the 80 carries, so maybe that was the group stage narrative. What happened is we drew Fun plus Phoenix. We were all extremely happy about drawing them because we thought they were one of the weaker teams in the quarters. Shame on us. So the day of the match or the night before, we get a leak from another team. One of my players gets a leak, and for those that don't know, every team leaks at.
Everyone, yeah, of course.
The higher the stakes, the more leaks there are. Everything gets leaked. Like we get leaked upon, other teams leak, and it comes from really weird angles. We've had like I think in season 7, a Korean team even reached out to us to leak on another Korean team.
Yeah.
On another Korean team. Like it comes from weird angles, and you're getting leaked upon in the scrims.
Of course.
Because let's say we have a friend in another European team, then one of my it only has to be one player, and usually I don't even know about it. So anyway, one of my players comes to me and says they're training first pick Saya, which completely changed our drafts because they didn't do that in the group stage. So we're working out the drafts, and eventually it comes down to 2 things. Either we give them Renekton. I tell the team I can give them Renekton first pick and I will win the draft. Or we give them Saya, but we're playing Yuumi Garen because I couldn't work out a winning draft. We didn't play Kai'Sa at the time. So that's important to probably add to that. And in my heart, I kind of knew that the Renekton one was the right one, but we also had a very strong sense against playing against Renekton because when we played against in scrims, mostly in mid lane, they would just run bot lane level 3, level 4, and the game would end with the prio that they had. So there was we had to choose between 2 evils, and eventually 2 of the players decided kind of cut the cord on that because I was fine with either, because in my head, we could also just next time we're red side, we just do the Renekton draft if this goes wrong. But for me, it was a 50-50. We play Yuumi Garen in the first game. We lose. Didn't have too much to do with that pick in particular, I would say, but of course we went away from the narrative of playing 80 carries and winning with it. And one of the players completely tilts behind backstage, to an extent I've very rarely seen. Starts being angry about the draft and how we play, and blah blah blah. So the series was basically lost after the first game, despite that when we did run back, I think it was game 2, or no, it was game 3 probably. We went to red side, we did the Renekton draft, we gave them the Renekton, we beat them. Like that's a regret, Like what if we had started off the series with that Renekton pick, like giving them the Renekton and doing that draft, like picking the Ornn that no one was playing at the time. It's one of those that could have shaped the entire Wolves differently, because if you start at 1-0 in a series like that and your players have a good mindset, it could have ended in a win. Basically, that's what I still believe in.
When you just said there, like you didn't play Kai'Sa at the time, obviously another thing which is like, it's a very light criticism, but a criticism of Rekkles has been similar to how, because one thing I find fascinating about games I've noticed is a lot of how people play basically actually can tell you about who they are as an individual and how they think about the world and how they see the world. Like there's kind of like a mirror, like your character sort of inflects in the game. And so in the same way as an AD carry, he's kind of a risk averse AD carry often. I've noticed he's also a player where when you're as good as he is, right, I've no doubt if we could like put it this way, at gunpoint, I've no doubt he could play almost any AD carry and he'd be at least pretty good on it, if not like at minimum, like average LXC level. But if he has the choice, Rekkles will have certain champions or certain times where it's like he's the one who restricts his champion pool. And I always got the sense he only likes to feel comfy on certain things. And if it's outside his comfort zone for some reason, it's not to be done. It was some of this at play here. I mean, you would think a player like him, he should be able to get the hang of a champion like Kai'Sa.
The Kai'Sa particular, I don't really fault him for it because we never really thought it was necessary. We were usually drafting Ezreal into it, and we were really fine with it. It was a fine matchup. So for that particular one, I would say no. I think generally this comes back to he needs to have trust in his teammates or himself, like knowing that he's better than enemy bot lane. And in that sense, he has a few champions that he feels that he can trust himself to carry the game regardless of what happens. So he does restrict himself because he says, like, yeah, I can play a Varus or an Ashe, but I don't know if we're going to win the game. But if you draft me Tristana or Sivir or Xayah, I will win the game. He's that clear about it. I think his mindset has changed based on what I'm seeing him pick in 2020 and 2021. Like, he's playing a lot more like Senna. He's played a lot of Ashe and Varus. So but how I characterized him was he needs, at the time, he needs champions that have escapes, dashes. So he was always playing Xayah, Tristana. I guess Sivir is kind of out of the mold. There's probably other champions that work well with either escapes or dashes, but getting him to play something like Varus or Ashe was very difficult because he needed to have A, the trust in his teammates to keep him safe, and B, the trust in himself to carry the games. And usually he didn't have that, and he just said, Joey, listen, I might be a good Varus, but I don't know if I can carry the game. Just pick me Tristana, even if it's a losing matchup, I'll carry the game. So in a sense, he limited himself. At times, I didn't like it at all because there were metas where champions, like especially Varus, I think in 2018 was extremely broken for a while. Kog'Maw had showed his face for a while as well, but again didn't have a dash, so he didn't want to play them. But you know, in the end, if you do draft him as champions, he stuck to his word and he carried the game. So you kind of knew what you were working with, even if it was limited at times.
One of the weirdest areas I've noticed that even some of the best players I've known in esports, like in the game, the best players, sometimes lacked a skill in real life is they almost expected that because they're good at something, their teammates should know it, and their teammates should, without even speaking to them, know what to do to set them up, to make them look good. They never understood that. Like, another skill, you should know this as a coach, I've no doubt, is how you convince them. It's the way you get across them. It's the way you get a connection with that guy, and you make him want to trust you do this for you. Because again, if a fan hears this, they're going to think, are these guys out of their mind? So these guys won't peel for Rekkles. Like, they won't set Rekkles up in a winning scenario, when obviously anyone who's watched FNATIC knows that a bazillion games have been won doing just that. Like, what do you think the disconnect was in that respect? Like, how could people not be on board with that?
Well, that might be the struggle with the bot lane in general, with trust, and also Hilly's strength is not to peel and play the Tahm Kench and be there for Rekkles. Like, and Rekkles knew that. Like, we could draft Tahm Kench, but Hylissang was going on the front line, and he was going to try to get his stacks to eat someone and throw him in his team because he's just going to look for engages and creative plays and flanks. So he probably didn't trust Hilly to protect him, and in a way, he was probably right because Hylissang was going to find engages. But of course, now I personally think that Hylissang, especially 2018 to 2020, was the best engage support in the world. Like, if you give him an engage support, he will create magic. Like, it was him and Mickey X. You give them a Rakan, give them a Leona, maybe Pyke you could throw in there. That's what Hylissang shines on. You don't want to put him on Tahm Kench if you don't have to, because he's just so good on the engaged champions, but they don't fit at all with what a Varus, for example, needs. So we played some like Varus Braum or Lucian Braum, but again, you know, Hylissang will be the one engaging with this flash ult Q, usually having good engages, but then of course there's no peel. Rekkles dies, not happy. It's like, you know what, if I had Xayah here, I would have killed the enemy, or I would have at least been safe. So I think in that regard, it made sense. It felt a little bit limited because they were kind of limiting each other in that regard, where we couldn't also play very strong lane bullies to help Hylissang then find the engages or like help him roam in some metas, because we just had to pick like the scaling ones and hope we get through it.
Since, as I alluded to there, like, a lot of fans wouldn't know that the successful teams, I mean, at the end of the day, it's still just a bunch of like 20-year-old guys. Even the successful teams have meltdowns, have people say, like, fuck you, I'll never play you again. And then, you know, in the next game, they're right there and they win the game together, right? As someone who was in G2, was in FNATIC, can you talk to this a little bit? Because I've always felt it's one of the areas you can tell when someone's just a whiner, is if they're in like a bottom LCS team and they think that it's just perfect. They think it's paradise in the top team and, you know, there's no problems. It's like, you guys don't know. Like, every team has these problems to differing degrees, right?
The grass is always greener on the other side. And what I've come to realize is that This is a general statement, general rule. The better the player, the crazier he is. And that can be a positive crazy. It can also be a very negative crazy. Like I would say, like the most positive one is Caps. Like Caps is not a normal human. He thinks very different than human beings, but he's a very crazy, positive, dancing around, making other people happy. But it's not something that you would characterize as a normal person. Whereas we talked about Forgiven earlier, that's maybe more of a negative because he can be very toxic. But the general statement, the better the player, there's a good chance that he's very crazy. And it can be in a positive way, but they're probably not the average functioning human beings. They are extremely well functioning in video games, and they also usually have one or two characteristic traits that aren't very common.
Right, since in the story of the G2 time, it was like, you know, the narrative developed like you're just cooking and getting them the drinks and stuff and all, you know, they coach themselves, blah, 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 all the rest of it. Now, I'm pretty sure to me you proved that wrong in FNATIC. But then you ended up in this scenario where I do know how this can happen because, again, I know what 20-year-old guys are like, no matter how good they are at video games. But as an outsider, if you looked at this like football, you would think, well, of course, Youngbuck's going to be there. Look what he just did for the team. You would even think the players would go, he did a great job coaching us, like all these things. All I'll say is this, right? I've heard basically it was kind of like an ultimatum situation. Like basically, you didn't have a choice as to whether you stayed in FNATIC or not. Like they had to pick between you and some, let's just say some other element of the team, and they chose the other element of the team. Is that accurate?
I personally never made an ultimatum. In fact, I had a 3-year offer on the table to extend with FNATIC.
I meant more like another player in the team made the ultimatum, or players.
Maybe without my knowing. There was definitely at the end of this. Well, I'm sorry, remembering there were at the end of the season, you know, where Patrik, Satterman, Karn was like, you know, you should talk a bit to Rekkles, you know, get on his good side again. And at some point, what happened is that the CEO came in, and the CEO had made a big blunder earlier in the season, and basically made me look like a fool. And basically, I accepted to look like a fool internally, and I was asked to tell him what was going on in the team. I had basically explained to Patrik. I had actually talked to him as well, because in the negotiation there were like 4 or 5 guys involved, and like how I see the future of the team. And I explained to him, listen, you need to make at least 2 or 3 changes because you're easily going to make Worlds in 2021, but 2022 it's going to be an absolute shit show, which is kind of true. But I have to say, it took a very different path than I predicted. But he then basically told me, he basically set up a meeting for me to kind of tell him what was going on within the team and how I see things. And then I said, I'm not going through this again. I'm not going to have this talk again and make a fool of myself. This is absolutely ridiculous. I'm going to stick to my values. FNATIC, I'm out. Have fun. And I said my goodbyes, and I said, I'm not doing this. I'm out. Your offer. It's the offer is off the table. See you around, I guess.
I've told this story on some talk shows, but because for Season 9 Worlds, I was actually in LA because me and Monty did that mad thing where, who knows how the fuck Monty pulled this off, but he convinced Cloud9 to like bring someone an insight back, pay us all, fly us out to a studio, and like, I still don't know how he did it. That was some fucking magic right there. But anyway, it was fun. But when I was there, obviously I'm where all the LCS teams are, and it goes out saying every LCS team's home early from Worlds because fucking League of Legends, isn't it? So I was talking, and people know this story. I know it sounds mad that this would even happen, but one of the few people in TSM I don't hate asked me to come and basically have like lunch with them, like, you know, have a chat about stuff, and you know, like you do with esports. Like even though half the time you want to just be normal guys, it always goes back to esports immediately, you know, and like this player and I've heard this. Yeah. And when we were doing all that, right, I told them basically because I'd heard these like, listen, there's no way Youngbuck's going to be there from what I've heard. I told them, you guys have never had real coaches in this team, or basically if you have, you know, they failed or the players didn't trust them. And I said, think about what your number one problem in your team is. It's always that you got sick players, but then like there's trust issues, and then, you know, this player doesn't know how to play with a jungler or whatever. I said, look, the guy who can fix all your problems is in Europe right now, Youngbuck, and he's available. I could not believe when I heard, because I asked you on one of my shows after that like not only did this particular team not give you an offer, but you just didn't even get the offers from these big teams. Like, do people just not know what you've done in your career? Do you think people just don't get the sense of who you are?
I think, again, it comes back to the narrative of G2, because that's where it started. I was branded as the mother of the team and like doing all the things outside of the game. There's no because here. After I won 4 splits with G2 and made MSI finals, can you imagine how many offers I had from NA and EU LCS teams?
I mean, I guess almost none.
In the end, I had 1. And that was FNATIC. I had only one offer because of that poor branding. At least that's what I personally think was the problem. I think Schalke had somewhat of a semi-offer, and then maybe an A team came a bit later. But I don't even think that happened really. I think it was actually in the end it was FNATIC or nothing. Yeah, it was FNATIC or nothing, and even that was a bit flimsy because negotiations I think weren't going that well. But I went to All Stars with sOAZ was there, Rekkles were there, and they saw what I was doing for them. I put in some effort, and they went back to Karn. Going back to that, I completely blew the job interview with Karn. I was really not in the mood to stay in Europe, and it was one of the first teams that talked to me. So I was just really negative. Like, blah, blah, blah. I was just in my head already going to NA. Remember what I said? I wanted to cash out. But the teams weren't coming, and then All Stars happened, and then Rekkles and sOAZ actually put in a good word and said, "You need to sign Joey no matter what." And I ended up getting signed on by FNATIC again, low salary, lower than most of my other colleagues, which it was fine. You know, we won a lot with the prize money, so it's all fine. And then again, you know, I win 2 splits. We have a good 2019, I would say, with FNATIC, and again, I didn't get many offers. I got I think one offer from NA. I got one offer from NA or some talks, like advanced talks. Another team came after I had signed with Excel, and then I had the two teams in Europe that I had to choose from. Excel was one of them, and was a pretty easy choice for me. But again, not many offers. But I hear other coaches have similar issues. They can have a good split or a good reputation, but so many teams don't change their coaches anymore. It's very difficult. But at the time, especially after G2, so it was started like before the 2018 season, it was really surprising. I won 4 splits, got only one offer, and I was just lucky it was FNATIC, basically. Because yeah, I did end up building most of my career there, I would say.
Now, when you came over to Excel, I mean, one of the things about this lineup is, unfortunately, right, the way fans do narratives is because, listen, like, there's lots and lots of people who are very casual and they don't have a deep understanding of the game. They have to make it simplistic so that, you know, they can understand it easily. So a fan will think, I notice with every individual, they take the team result and they say that's how good you were, right? So it doesn't matter that if I tell people the roster for the first split of Excel was the one with Mickey and Expect, and then after that you did the one with Cries, and, you know, these are players that, like, no one's saying these are all LCS players. No one's having these players as MVP vote players, you know. But basically, even though you have these different lineups and you're changing out all these players, they're all kind of like gamble players. They're either players that I call them like either reclaimed players. I mean, Dutch people should know all about that, where you try to bring back a player, you know, trying to make him better than he was, you know, or bring him back from the dead, or it's a player that's never made it. You're hoping he can become good, you know, right? These are rosters where, like, they're very experimental rosters, and I don't know that the other coaches would tell me, give me that team, like, I want that squad. How do you, does this mean that in a fucked up way, does Excel prove that you must be a good coach? Because you would basically, I'll tell everyone very quickly, you were 2 games off the playoffs in the first split. Then with the Cries roster, you were technically 0 games. You were in a tiebreaker scenario, but you didn't have the tiebreaker. And then this last split, you were 1 game from the playoffs. So 3 times with rosters that, quite frankly, I don't think anyone thinks is going to, like, place top 4 in LEC. You were right in position to make playoffs all those times. Does this vindicate you, Diego?
I think publicly it's the opposite way, where I'm now considered that I was always a bad coach that was being carried because I haven't made the playoffs in 3 splits in a row.
Damn it.
Yeah. I was useless. I was just there for the ride. I think there is, of course, the different narrative that you put it. Like, I joined a pretty broken, bad team. I think they finished 10th the split before that, and we had 3 out of the 5 same players. We were 2 games away from playoffs, but quite frankly, the Korean players were absolutely not working within the team, and it was getting worse week by week. So we promoted from the academy team. We promoted special, and we took Kreis, who had, I think he played like half a split in Unicorns of Love, and he did like the German playoffs, but didn't even make EU Masters. So it was, we got 8 wins, which was absolutely ridiculous. Coach of the split worthy, I would say, based on the roster, and also that we had by far the lowest budget of any team, and had to work with so many rookies. One game away, and again, you know, had I think it wasn't just up to us. Like, in the end, we had to beat G2.
Other people had to win games or whatever. Yeah,
everything had to happen. I think Vitality beat Misfits despite being on like a 6-game losing spree. But if Misfits had won, we would have made playoffs. And then if Mad Lions, which was I think 2nd place or the 3rd place at the time, if they had beaten Schalke, we would have made it in, and didn't happen. And yeah, your entire coaching narrative, how good you are, revolves around whether you make playoffs with a team like Excel. And this split again, yeah, we were 1 game away, and yeah, let's just say that I think that some performances I couldn't see coming. Basically, I wasn't expecting some of the underperformances in the roster. So it has to kind of show next split, I guess, that we can make playoffs and that I'm a playoff worthy coach.
Right, one reason people will know, obviously, aside from the fact that like I was charting this narrative throughout the time of your FNATIC and then coming to Excel, another reason, listen, I'll be absolutely selfish, that I wanted this to happen was because the team that almost lost out twice was FNATIC. FNATIC would have not made playoffs this split and then in the summer split if this scenario happened, right? So I personally would have thought like that in the movie, that's how I'd end the movie. The last act is like, whether or not you win the fucking LEC, who cares? Like, the idea would be, you beat your old team with worse players. So, well, you can't say that, but I'll say it. I don't think they were as good players. Put it this way, they weren't all LCS players. There we go. That's a fact. We can't dispute that. So what about this, right? Would you, if you had have actually made it in over FNATIC, would you have done what? Listen, everyone wants to be a nice guy, but like, you know, sometimes I like to shit talk. Would you have just been humble and not said anything? If you'd have made it in over FNATIC, would you have maybe trash talked a little bit, maybe said a little spicy tweet or something, you know?
So I'm not going to say I would have done it, but in my head, I just had the idea to tweet XD. I was just having that laugh in my head if we had made it in, and of course it played through my head. There is no bad blood between me and FNATIC, but that is of course the movie storyline that you want.
Yes.
And I do think it's something that's quite normal. If you leave a team, you kind of want to see it do worse. It's
human nature, right?
It's human nature. I had to deal with it. I was a goalkeeper when I was a year 18, and I left the team. And I told my father, like, I don't know what's wrong, but I hope they do worse. I hope they lose. And these were all my real life friends.
Sure.
I loved them, and they was like, it's very normal to want some self validation that you were valuable to the team by wanting to see them do worse. So I was kind of able to already process it at that time, and it did happen after that with other teams. Now, when I just left G2, I wanted them to do much worse, which they did at the time. So I was happy, but as time goes on, you know, you forget about it. Now I wish all the best to G2. I love seeing them win and do good. Well, they didn't do good this split, but I love seeing them do well at Worlds, and especially in 2020. I just think usually shortly after you leave a team, it's okay to have that kind of feeling. It's really acceptable, and I think a lot of players go through it, and there's a lot of PR about it. But of course, you know, my favorite storyline would have been making playoffs over FNATIC. That, despite liking maybe 80% of the people who work at FNATIC and the players, you cannot change that. That is, maybe a spicy tweet would have happened. Probably I would have just stayed humble because it's backfired a few times already. So going a little bit out of my shell. So, but yeah, that's basically all there is to that.
The one angle that I actually noticed was quite cool for the XL lineup, because as you said, like they came in, they were the worst team, like everything was terrible, and even then, the other worst team was Rogue, and everyone knows they just promoted all the players and instantly solved their own problem, right? When you had this squad, the one big positive you had going for you is that bizarrely over the last few years in League of Legends in Europe, a region which famously, we weren't known for the AD carries, obviously. Suddenly we had all this crop of AD carries. And I remember thinking like, this is going to get really interesting because they can't all go to the top teams. We've got too many good AD carries. And so obviously you ended up with Patrik, formerly known as Sheriff. And certainly, I mean, he'd been in the Origin team. Certainly he was a very good player. You know, he only basically got kicked out because they wanted an upset instead. Like another player of similar caliber, potentially top talent, right? In this team, is it safe to say you knew what you had in a player like Patrik and you tried to play around his strengths, etc.? He looked like there was times when he was all LCS level, LEC rather.
No, I think when Patrik was signed, I kind of expected him to be where he was in Origin, like kind of like, I think he was at the time like a 5th or 6th AD carry, but there were like one or two standout AD carries. Of course, there was Rekkles. I don't know who else it was, and then everyone else Perks. Everyone else was kind of the same. All good, but same and a little bit different tendencies or champion pools. You know, one guy likes Draven, the other guy likes Ashe, but it was okay. But I do like playing to bot lane, and again, mid to bot is my favorite kind of play style. So I think that he also had a much better environment, because environment in Origin / Astralis has been known to not be the greatest for the players. So
yes,
I think him changing his environment, having a team play more towards him, just made him show, because he got all pro in the summer, which was, I think, very deserved for how often he put us on his back. But no, I had no clue he was going to be that good. No clue whatsoever.
And then just because you referenced him earlier in the interview, and I noticed you did, like, it just was a side comment, right? I remember way back in the day, one of the things that no one can say about Veteran is he can't claim he has no eye for the game. Like, he's called a lot of players before they were good, etc. He actually used to say, back when he criticised Broxah, because the obvious question is, well, what do you do about that? He always got a lot of hate for saying, well, in the FNATIC Rising team, they have this guy, Dan, I would just put him in. Like, he knows how to play these concepts I'm talking about. And people thought at the time, he's crazy. You've alluded to it. You actually thought of that yourself. You wanted that to be the sixth man in the FNATIC team and use him. It's just that in the end they went with Broxah, right? So obviously this year you got Dan into XL. He's the player you brought over. So what did you see in this player? Like, what do you envision? Because I noticed, despite that being years ago, that conversation happened on a talk show, no one else was trying to get this guy. Like, no, people weren't falling over themselves to recruit him.
Yeah, I mean, he had an offer for LEC starting offer for 2020, and he had another one in 2021. Of course, we took him. What I saw in him is that when I was working with him, with the six-man roster, I realized this is the player that knows my system better than any other player and knows how to apply it in the game. So from taking a tower, how you go about going to the next tower or the next objective, he remembers everything, is able to chain it well, and that is something that we in Excel definitely needed. So that was for me the main reason. Very coachable in that regard, and just very deep macro understanding. He wasn't the only guy on our list. We talked to Elyoya, like that was a no-brainer. Kadril was also the other one we were really considering for LEC starting position. But you know, if you're competing with Mad Lions for a player, it's not going to happen. They went to World, so it doesn't matter what you offer. Actually, Elyoya even joined Mad Lions, I think, way before other teams made any moves, so that was kind of a done deal. And then for us, it was Dan or Kadril. We needed change. We had 8 wins, didn't make playoffs, but we also kind of, or at least I realized that we had some lucky wins that weren't very reproducible, and that if we would stay together, we'd probably have 5 or 6 wins. So it was basically survival of the fittest, upgrade wherever we can, talk to players in 4 different positions, try to build super teams, but you know, it's not always easy. But yeah, then we went the talent route, and Dan was then on top of the list because of the things I mentioned beforehand.
What is left in terms of, like, if you had like a vision board with the goals and things you want to do? Like, for example, in light of some of the things you said earlier, is it still a dream that, like, I win LEC and I do it with a totally different team, and then, you know, in doing so, people have to believe that, you know, because by the way, that the negative that's worked against you, mate, could go the other way and work in your favour. Like, if you win LEC, it doesn't have to be with XL, do with it XL or another team in the future. Eventually, if people decide you're a good coach, they'll then look back on history and they'll change the whole narrative. Suddenly you always were a great coach, and suddenly you did help those players. So is that something that's still, is that burning in the mind? Is that a big deal?
It's part of it. So in the start of my career, this was the biggest drive. I wanted to create a legacy. I wanted to go down in the history books as like the best coach ever. I quickly learned that it doesn't matter what you do. In 6 months, everyone has forgotten, and that was basically we made world finals with FNATIC, and of course 3 weeks into the spring split, we were all shit, and we got lucky to make a world finals, and we had a lucky draw and a lucky this and a lucky that. I joined Excel because I wanted to do. It was part of it, because I wanted to get a team and just outperform the expectations that people have on the team to show that I'm a good coach. And then it's up to the people watching whether they think that I've managed to do that. Like, I don't think I've massively overperformed or underperformed, so it didn't really happen. I would say, like, it's not a very strong sentiment. It's not like I took Excel from 10th place to like a top 4 team yet. It might happen next split, who knows? Maybe we just end up buying all the best players at the end of the season, and then we win the next season that way, which is not much legacy building. But it used to be a main drive. Now I realized with all things, you know, it's not just like with FNATIC. It's if a player does really well for his team, but then joins another team and the team doesn't do well, suddenly that player also didn't do well on that team, and narrative changed so quickly based on how someone is currently doing. And as my father would then wisely say, people only forget your recent results or your last result. The rest is just forgotten. So fighting for legacy is not on the forefront of my mind anymore.
Since, as you said, in the past, it was something that could have been on the table, going to LCS, going to a big NA team, etc. Right? I know people in the past, they used to think in interviews, you have to pretend you're going to be with the team forever. But all I'll say is everyone's seen the off-seasons of League of Legends. They're brutal. Everyone has to renegotiate. Everyone can get replaced. Everything's possible nowadays. One day, maybe it's 3-4 years down the line. Do you see a world where one day, do you think one day you will coach in America? Is that something you would like to do before you end your career?
It's not on my bucket list per se. It's not off the table. I do have a preference for just staying in Europe because I do want to build a family here as well, and I think it's just easier to do on home soil. Germany isn't really home soil, but it's culturally very similar to the Netherlands at least. But it is definitely possible. I think in the last time we spoke, we talked about, I think I had like a $600,000 offer from a Chinese team that I turned down. But NA, of course, doesn't have to offer that kind of money. It's very similar, kind of similar culture. I've been there for a while, but it's a possibility. I will definitely consider NA offers in the future, with a preference for European ones.
When the European Union takes over all of Europe, you should get, like, I don't know if you're going to have these, you know, in England, we have that thing with the Queen, like, if you do, like, amazing things in a certain sport, right, she literally knights you. You become a knight because of your, like, services to the country for the sport, right? You should get something from Europe. If there's a Dutchman turning down a $600,000 contract, like, how did you do that? You must have at least been fucking thinking, I bet that was a hard email to press the reply button on.
The thing is, I'm a little bit... a bit strange about it because the first thing I think is I don't speak the language and I will not like the food there, so it's a no-go. And I had to go away from my family basically, and it was like, even my girlfriend was like, yeah, we can do it, you know, we can fly there and
she was telling you to go for it. Yeah.
Basically, yeah. Like I mean it's a lot of money and it's worth considering, you know. It's
sure,
again, like after G2 I wanted to cash out, why not now? Well, back then I didn't have that family sentiment as much as I do now, but yeah, I could have just been there for 2 years and then enjoy the rest of my life, maybe being a part-time coach or something. But that's not for me. China it's not. I cannot handle that big of a culture difference, I think.
Right, at the end of this interview, it's been a long one, but it's been a good one. Do you have any final words for people, somebody you want to thank or somebody you want to say hello to?
No, I didn't prepare for that, so but I think it's just a general thanks to Excel fans, and also actually still to the FNATIC fans, because I know you're not a big fan of them, Thorin, and sometimes I also see some crazy stuff, but I do have to say, when I left, there was a lot of positive messages, and sometimes I still get some positive notifications in my Twitter feed. If you have a Pookie style avatar, leave me alone for the next few weeks. That's maybe something to add. Other than that, I think we're going to do much better in the summer. That's about it, really.
Thank you, Vel.
Graag gedaan.
This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Chris with a K, Lager15, Pronogo, Shenlong, Zachary Carter, Adam Ox, Alexander Rao, Andreas Crockneys, Animosity, Dean Tanglis, Eric Hillestad, Hades, J Dubs, Jensen Gore, Joseph Ginsberg, Kovacevic, Tobias Bernasconi, Zumba, Zyrathenia, and as always, special thanks going out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Want to suggest topics or guests for my shows? Want to ask me questions in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers? Who are the upcoming guests? Maybe you want to be part of one of those discussions I do where we nerd out. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrolluminati today by using the Patreon link in the description box below.